You walk into a room and the energy shifts before you say a word. That reaction has nothing to do with arrogance. It's recognition. People can feel when someone carries command, even if you never announce it. Your presence unsettles those who rely on control through manipulation or fear. You don't compete for attention, yet you own it. They see you as a threat, because your confidence reminds them of everything they try to fake. Leadership is not about status or title, it's about gravity. You pull focus naturally, and that gravity exposes the fragility in those who only lead through noise. That's why your influence triggers them. They can't replicate authenticity. The psychology behind their reaction is simple. Most people build identity through hierarchy. They define themselves by being above someone else, by controlling, by dominating. When you arrive without playing their game, you break their entire system. You don't ask for permission. You don't flatter egos. You just exist, and that alone dismantles their illusion of power. They mistake calm for threat because they've never met power that doesn't need validation. The real reason they're triggered isn't your words. It's your lack of need. Control freaks depend on dependency. When they realize you aren't seeking their approval, they panic. Independence feels like rebellion to the insecure. Every true leader carries an invisible mirror. People look at you and see the version of themselves they wish they could become. For the strong, that reflection inspires. For the weak, it terrifies. That's why your growth, your discipline, your composure makes certain people uneasy. You remind them of their laziness, their excuses, their wasted potential. They call you intimidating to hide the fact that they feel exposed. Their discomfort has nothing to do with your actions. It's their own self-awareness attacking them from the inside. You didn't trigger them. They triggered themselves in your presence. Notice how often they misinterpret your silence. When you stay quiet, they think you are calculating. When you speak, they accuse you of arrogance. You could say nothing and still be accused of something, because your existence alone disturbs their balance. This is the curse of influence. It amplifies reactions you never intended to cause. The insecure need enemies to explain their discomfort, so they turn your calm into a threat narrative. But that only proves what you already know. Leadership reveals who is ready to grow and who is desperate to control. They will gossip about you to shrink what they can't surpass. They'll question your motives, your competence, even your morals. It's not personal. It's survival instinct. Your presence disrupts the pecking order, and people who built their identity on dominance feel cornered. They can't fight you directly because power built on deceit can't withstand truth. So they use social tactics, whispers, exclusion, fake kindness. Let them. Every attempt to undermine you confirms your position. People only attack what stands taller. When your influence triggers noise, it means you're leading silently and effectively. Influence doesn't come from talking louder. It comes from being consistent when others are performative. You didn't need to announce authority. You earned it through discipline, through the way you handle pressure, through your refusal to join chaos. That quiet control is rare, and rarity always threatens mediocrity. They expect leaders to demand loyalty. You lead by example instead. That's why people trust you even when they're unsure why. True influence doesn't ask. It compels. It makes others rethink how they move, what they tolerate, and what they follow. You're not trying to dominate them. You're showing them how dominance looks without force. Understand that triggering others is part of leadership. You cannot inspire without also intimidating. The same light that guides some blinds others. It's not your job to dim your glow for comfort. If people crumble under your presence, it means they were never stable to begin with. The goal is not to please, it's to elevate. Let the discomfort of your influence burn away weakness in those who can handle it and expose hypocrisy in those who can't. Growth always feels threatening to those who depend on stagnation. You don't need to prove leadership. It's already evident in how they respond to you. Their gossip proves relevance. Their imitation proves admiration. Their distance proves intimidation. You don't need their acknowledgement. You already hold it in the way they react when you enter. The truly powerful never chase recognition. They are recognized naturally. Remember, even silence can be loud when it comes from someone who doesn't need to speak to be understood. Stay grounded in purpose, because influence without direction becomes ego. You trigger people when you forget to play small, but you also attract those who crave authenticity. The world doesn't need more followers. It needs anchors. People who can stay calm when others panic. You lead not because you want it to rule, but because chaos finds order around you. That is your gift. And like all gifts, it comes with isolation, misunderstanding, and envy. Wear it anyway. Leadership that doesn't provoke emotion is leadership that doesn't move anyone. You never came into the room to destroy peace. You came to understand it. Yet, every question you asked felt like a blade slicing through illusion. They were used to conversations that protected comfort, not truth. You brought questions that cut to bone. You asked what no one dared to ask. You questioned motives, stories, and masks. In doing so, you didn't just expose others. You revealed what was buried in yourself. People don't fear answers. They fear the kind of questions that make answers irrelevant. You brought those, and that's why they flinched. Your curiosity was never gentle, it was surgical. You didn't seek to wound, but you couldn't help but uncover rot when you touched what they spent years pretending was whole. There's a reason truth tellers get labeled as difficult. When you bring questions that cut deep, people can't hide behind polite conversation. They start sweating. Their rehearsed lines crumble. Their smiles stiffen. You strip away their comfort by asking things they've built their lives avoiding. You didn't need aggression to make them defensive. Clarity was enough. You questioned why they settled, why they lied, why they pretended, and those words hit harder than any insult could. They weren't angry at your tone. They were angry at the reflection you forced them to see. That's why you were misunderstood. They thought you enjoyed conflict, but all you did was refuse to play along with delusion. Psychology calls it cognitive dissonance, the inner war that starts when reality collides with illusion. You became that collision. When you asked questions like, "Who are you when no one's watching?" Or, "What are you protecting by staying the same?" You turned on a light in a room they swore was empty. Most people live comfortably in darkness. They prefer routine over truth. Your words forced them to confront themselves, and confrontation always feels like violence to the self-deceived. You didn't hurt them. They hurt themselves on the edge of your honesty. That's why they called you cruel. But cruelty is simply what truth feels like to someone addicted to lies. They never expected that your calm would be so disarming. They prepared defenses for arguments, not inquiry. A question bypasses ego. It slips under armor. You never accused, you asked. That made it impossible for them to attack back without admitting what they were running from. You didn't have to raise your voice. The weight of your words did it for you. You made silence work like a blade. Every time you asked something they couldn't answer, they felt smaller, exposed, fragile. That's the power of real dialogue. It leaves no place to hide. And deep down, they knew your questions weren't for cruelty. They were for awakening. The tragedy is that not everyone wants to wake up. You must understand the loneliness that comes with this clarity. Those who question too deeply often lose the comfort of belonging. The world runs on unspoken agreements, to stay quiet, to look away, to pretend. You broke that rhythm. You asked what happens if we stop pretending? That made you dangerous because systems, whether families, friendships, or institutions, depend on silence to survive. You made silence impossible. They didn't exile you because you were wrong. They exiled you because you made them see too much. Your questions became mirrors they couldn't smash. They called you disruptive when, in truth, you were healing something they didn't want healed. The art of questioning is psychological warfare for the dishonest. They can lie to you, but they cannot lie to themselves while answering your questions. Every why you pose forced them to re-examine choices they justified for years. Every how made them face consequences they ignored. Your questions peeled off the layers they used to cover guilt. You didn't just speak, you excavated. That's what makes your words dangerous. You don't talk to impress. You talk to uncover. And once someone has been seen clearly by you, they can never go back to believing their own performance fully again. That's why they resent you. You stole their ability to believe their own story. Not all wounds bleed. Some wounds sit behind forced laughter and polite replies. You found those without trying. You noticed the tremor in their confidence, the hesitation in their logic, the pauses that said more than words. You didn't even need to accuse them. They confessed in how they reacted to your calm. That's the mark of psychological power. You don't force revelation, you allow it. They were terrified not because you had proof, but because you had perception. The ability to see what's unsaid is something the deceitful cannot defend against. They will always call that intuition arrogance, but deep down, they know you simply see too clearly. Understand that your questions were never meant for destruction. They were meant for clarity. But clarity breaks illusions, and people love their illusions more than truth. That's why your presence feels like judgment even when you mean no harm. You've learned that truth. Telling doesn't require shouting. It requires observation. The strongest questions are quiet. They pierce softly and echo long after you've left. Those echoes stay with them, following them into silence, keeping them awake at night. You never had to win arguments. They replay your words themselves, over and over, until the denial breaks on its own. That is your real influence. They'll call you cold, detached, heartless. That's projection. You simply stopped giving comfort to lies. The world confuses empathy with indulgence. You refuse to soothe self-deception, and that looks merciless to those who depend on it. But you've learned that true compassion is sometimes ruthless. Asking hard questions is an act of care, because it pulls people out of illusions before those illusions destroy them. You don't heal through comfort. You heal through confrontation. And while they may hate you for it now, someday they will remember your questions as the start of their awakening. You learned long ago that pain does not need an audience. While others announce every bruise, you've mastered silence. You don't parade your scars because you understand their value. They are not ornaments, they are archives. Each one holds a story, but not everyone deserves to read it. Your scars are your education, carved into your flesh by experience, and displaying them would only invite interpretation from those who have never survived what you did. The ones who perform their pain are seeking sympathy, you don't. You've outgrown the need to be pitied. Strength built in the dark never demands recognition. It simply stands, steady and whole, while others crumble under the weight of their need to be seen. They watch you and wonder how you remain composed. They call you mysterious, detached, distant. But what they're really seeing is discipline. You refuse to weaponize your past or use it to control people's perception of you. You could tell them everything. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the battles that almost ended you, but you don't, because survival taught you that silence protects dignity. When people know your wounds, they start to treat you like one. You'd rather be underestimated than pitied. Let them guess. Let them make up stories about your calm. Their curiosity is proof of your control. You've learned that the less you explain, the more powerful your presence becomes. Psychology calls it emotional sovereignty, the ability to feel deeply without broadcasting it. You've mastered it. Most people seek validation for their suffering. They post it, they perform it, they want the world to applaud their endurance. You, on the other hand, learned that healing is sacred. It happens in private, not public. You let your scars harden quietly because you know strength is diluted when shared too soon. They mistake your silence for numbness, but you're not cold, you're focused. Every scar became a map toward clarity, a reminder of what not to touch again. You don't hide them out of shame. You keep them guarded because they belong to you alone. When you stop parading your scars, you stop letting others define your story. The world loves turning pain into spectacle. People want tragedy they can romanticize, not truth that confronts them. They want you to dramatize your wounds so they can compare their own. But you refuse to participate in that exchange. You've reached the point where peace is more valuable than attention. You no longer need your scars to speak for you, because your composure already does. Every calm response, every measured word, every moment of restraint, they all whisper that you've seen worse and survived it. That's what unsettles them. Your silence has weight, because they can feel the history it carries. They'll try to pull your stories out of you. They'll say they want to understand, but what they really want is access to your mind, to your strength, to your secrets. You've learned that vulnerability in the wrong hands becomes currency. That's why you keep your scars private. You give people glimpses, not ownership. You're not bitter, you're cautious. Pain shared with the wrong person becomes ammunition, and you've already been shot enough times to know the cost. So now, When they ask too much, you smile. You give them fragments of truth wrapped in simplicity. Because the full story belongs to the version of you that bled to build this calm. And that version no longer explains itself. People mistake your restraint for pride. They assume silence means ego. They don't realize it's wisdom. You've learned that healing doesn't require witnesses. In fact, the deeper the wound, the quieter the recovery. The loudest healers are often the ones still bleeding. You no longer seek comfort in noise. You've made peace with solitude, because that's where the real work happens. Your scars are not open letters. They're locked journals. They don't need validation, they hold lessons. Every person who once hurt you unknowingly became a teacher. You don't parade those lessons. You apply them. And that is what gives you an aura they can't name but always feel. You don't parade your scars because you don't want people defining you by what you survived. You want to be known for what you became after. The world obsesses over trauma, glorifying struggle like its identity. You reject that idea. Pain may have shaped you, but it doesn't own you. You've turned it into art, discipline, clarity, but never performance. When they look at you, they see the result, not the process. And that's the difference between you and them. They chase sympathy. You chase mastery. They crave witnesses. You crave transformation. That's why you're free while they're still begging for closure. When they finally learn pieces of your past, it unnerves them. They can't believe you've gone through so much and still carry yourself with grace. That disbelief is proof of your strength. You turned agony into elegance. You turned chaos into order. You didn't let pain turn you bitter. You used it as fuel. And because you refuse to parade your scars, your strength feels effortless to them. They'll never understand the hours it took to rebuild your mind or the battles you fought in silence. That's fine. They're not supposed to. True strength never explains itself. It only reveals itself through endurance. There's a dark kind of beauty in restraint. The world values loud healing, public tears, long captions, constant explanations. You value quiet recovery. You prefer to let people underestimate you, because underestimation keeps you safe. They think they've figured you out, but they've only met the surface. Your scars are the roots, buried deep, holding everything steady. That's why you're so unshakable. You don't hide your past out of fear. You simply refuse to let anyone use it as a weapon. Your silence protects what they could never handle knowing. It's not secrecy. It's strategy. They tried to bury you under noise, thinking the world would forget your name. They mocked excluded, twisted narratives, hoping your voice would fade. But brilliance doesn't need permission to exist. It survives every attempt to erase it. You are proof that brilliance cannot be silenced. You didn't fight with words, you fought with endurance. You let your results speak while they drowned in their own noise. They couldn't understand how you kept creating, how you kept shining even when their approval was withheld. But that's the secret of true brilliance. It grows in defiance. The more they tried to dim you, the brighter you became. Every obstacle turned into a spark. Every setback became fuel. You are living evidence that suppression never works on those built from fire. They never expected you to survive the silence. They thought if they ignored you long enough, you'd stop trying. That's what small minds assume, that absence of applause means absence of worth. But you learned early that validation is the cage of the talented. You stopped performing for them and began performing for yourself. That shift broke the spell. You became dangerous because you no longer needed them to witness your greatness. You became your own audience, your own standard, your own proof. That independence is what terrifies them most. They thrive on control, and brilliance that can't be controlled feels like rebellion. You didn't argue for your place. You built a table of your own, and now they wait outside, hoping you'll let them sit. Psychology defines suppression as an external force trying to contain internal power. But containment never works when the source is self-sustaining. You generate your own momentum. Even when isolated, you create. Even when doubted, you progress. That's why they couldn't silence you. They were fighting noise with noise, while you mastered silence itself. You disappeared from their stage, but not from the world. You worked in the dark, refining your craft, sharpening your mind. By the time they realized you were gone, you had already rebuilt yourself somewhere beyond their reach. That's how brilliance operates. It moves quietly, strikes suddenly, and leaves everyone questioning how they ever missed it. They called you difficult, obsessive, too intense. They tried to make your focus sound like a flaw. But deep down, they envied what they couldn't maintain. Mediocrity always despises consistency. They wanted you to lose your edge, to doubt your own rhythm, to conform to their comfort. But brilliance doesn't bend, it adapts. You outlasted their trends and their tactics. While they played politics, you played patience. And now, the results of that patience are undeniable. They tried to outtalk you, but your silence had more presence than their noise. They tried to erase you, but you turned erasure into evolution. Every failure they celebrated became the soil for your comeback. Brilliance has a rhythm most people can't hear. It doesn't need applause to stay alive. It runs on curiosity, conviction, and vision. You have all three. That's why every attempt to silence you backfired. When they withdrew support, you learned resourcefulness. When they withheld recognition, you built resilience. They thought they were breaking you, but they were building you. Your growth happened in private, while they wasted time performing in public. Now, when you speak, every word carries the weight of quiet years spent mastering yourself. You are proof that silence can forge power far louder than attention ever could. Your story exposes their biggest fear, that talent doesn't die when ignored. It multiplies. You took everything they withheld and turned it into energy. They can't comprehend how someone they tried to erase now dominates conversations they aren't invited to. But that's what brilliance does. It echoes. It doesn't need to shout. It resonates through the quality of what it creates. Every time they see your work, your progress, your calm, they're reminded that you outgrew their control. You became the reminder they wish didn't exist, a living contradiction to their belief that influence belongs to the loudest. You proved it belongs to the most unbreakable. Understand that brilliance and rebellion are twins. To shine in a world that rewards conformity is to commit a quiet act of defiance. You didn't fit their mold because you were never meant to. You didn't follow their timeline because brilliance isn't linear, it's volcanic. It builds pressure in silence, then erupts without warning. They mistook your stillness for surrender. But stillness was your strategy. You waited, studied, refined. And when the moment arrived, you erupted so completely that no one could deny what had been growing beneath the surface all along. That eruption is what they call overnight success. But you and I know, it was years of invisible work finally breaking through. People try to silence what they don't understand. They call it arrogance when you stop explaining, selfishness when you protect your peace, detachment when you refuse to beg for attention. But none of that matters. You've learned that those who misunderstand brilliance are meant to. You were not born to be understood. You were born to be undeniable. The more you simplify your focus, the more complex their confusion becomes. They cannot mute what radiates from the core. You are the kind of light that doesn't beg to be seen. It forces eyes to adjust. That's why they react the way they do. Your existence is proof that talent, once awakened, does not obey suppression. Brilliance also teaches compassion through solitude. You've learned not to hate those who tried to silence you. They were only doing what insecure people do when threatened. Their need to control what they can't match is human, not evil. But you've also learned never to return to their cage. Forgive, but never re-enter. Let your silence now be your final statement. You don't need to prove anything. You already did by surviving, thriving, and building where no applause reached. That's the legacy of real brilliance. It keeps creating even when no one is watching. At some point, you realize that no amount of explaining will make the blind see. You could break down every motive, every reason, every detail, and they would still twist it into something to use against you. That's when the silence begins. You stop defending yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop fighting for clarity in minds that feed on confusion. You finally understand that their goal was never to understand. It was to exhaust you. So you conserve your energy. You stop sending explanations into voids that only echo judgment back. You don't owe them your narrative anymore. The truth doesn't need to beg. It stands, even when misrepresented. And the moment you choose silence over justification, your power shifts back to you. They call your distance arrogance, but it's really freedom. You grew tired of performing explanations for an audience that came to criticize, not comprehend. These people were never listening. They were waiting. Waiting for slips, waiting for flaws, waiting to feel superior again. You start to see that some minds do not misunderstand you by accident. They need you to be the villain in their story, because your composure threatens their chaos. That's why every explanation you gave only made them more defensive. Your clarity cornered their ego. When you walk away instead, they call it guilt. They call it pride. But what it really is peace. You no longer allow others to drain you under the disguise of dialogue. There's a kind of beauty in surrendering the need to be understood. Not by everyone, just by the wrong ones. You begin to realize that your words will never land right in ears tuned to resentment. They aren't listening to learn, they're listening to respond. Their mind is already made up before you speak. You could hand them proof carved in stone, and they'd still claim it's an illusion. So you stop participating in their theater. You stop explaining your intentions to those who have already decided who you are. And when you do, something extraordinary happens. The noise fades. Their accusations still exist, but they no longer echo inside you. You finally make peace with being misjudged. Psychology calls it projection. They accuse you of the very things they do. They call you manipulative because your self-control exposes their impulsiveness. They call you cold because your detachment reminds them of how emotionally dependent they are. Once you see this, you stop trying to fix their perception. Their misunderstanding is their mirror, not your problem. The only reason it hurt before was because you were still trying to prove your purity in a place that feeds on impurity. You thought reason could fix resentment. Now you know better. You've learned that peace doesn't come from being understood. It comes from being unbothered. They'll still try to bait you. They'll misquote, twist, and provoke. They can't handle silence, because silence makes them confront the emptiness of their argument. When you stop explaining, they lose control. That's why they accuse you of avoidance or superiority. They need your energy to sustain their illusion of power. But you've learned that not every battle deserves your fire. Some fights end best in quiet exits. You don't slam doors. You just stop walking into rooms where respect doesn't exist. And that quiet exit terrifies them more than confrontation ever could. People who thrive on chaos fear indifference, because indifference means their influence is over.